In a medieval sick room stricken by the plague, a feverish man lies gasping as a healer leans over him, blade in hand. Bloodletting is the first hope. When that fails, he grabs a live toad and binds it to the swollen bubo, its legs kicking weakly as it's meant to draw out the poison. Nearby, another patient gulps a Mercury Potion that burns all the way down, praying the poison will chase out the greater one. Outside, a woman crouches over a bowl of her own urine, convinced it's medicine, just as a line of flagellants trudges past her, backs bleeding, chanting for God's mercy. These were the cures of the Black Death, desperate, brutal, and often deadlier than the plague itself. In the shadow of the great mortality, physicians clutched their lancets with trembling conviction, certain that salvation flowed through opened veins. The practice of bloodletting stretched back through centuries of medical doctrine, rooted in the Galenic understanding that health resided in the delicate equilibrium of four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. When the pestilence swept across Europe in 1347, carrying its burden of fever and swollen buboes, the learned men of medicine reached instinctively for their phlegms and cupping glasses, instruments that had served their profession since Hippocrates first theorized the humoral constitution of man. The barber surgeons, identified by their striped poles and basins of crimson water, performed the grim calculus of venesection upon rich and poor alike. They consulted astrological charts to determine propitious moments for bleeding, believing that planetary alignments governed the flow of humours through the body's invisible channels. Guy de Chauliac, physician to 3 popes at Avignon during the plague years, wrestled with the question in his Chirurgia Magna. How much blood must be drawn to forestall putrefaction, and at what stage of the disease? His writings reveal the agonizing uncertainty beneath professional confidence. Some say to bleed immediately, others to wait until the poison shows itself in the swelling. The medicinal leech, Hirudo medicinalis, became a creature of both commerce and desperation. Harvested from marshes and fenlands, these segmented beings were applied to temples, necks, and the proximity of plague swellings. The leech trade flourished as demand outstripped supply, with merchants transporting barrels of writhing specimens between cities. Byzantine texts translated through Arabic, the works of Avicenna and Al-Razi, provided theoretical justification for aggressive bloodletting protocols, their authority unquestioned across university faculties from Bologna to Paris. Yet the practice carried its own terrors. Excessive bleeding induced hypovolemia, a catastrophic depletion of blood volume that left patients weakened beyond recovery. When nobles perished beneath the lancet, accusations of malpractice echoed through court chambers. Ambroise Paré, the great French surgeon, would later observe the brutality of unrestrained venesection, though he remained bound to humoral principles. The Paracelsians, those early rebels of chemical medicine, challenged this hemorrhagic orthodoxy with mineral therapies, but their voices were drowned in the conservative chorus of established practice. In plague-stricken households, the sight became grimly familiar. A patient propped upon pillows, arm extended over a basin, while the surgeon's blade traced ancient lines across pale skin. The blood flowed dark and thick, carrying with it the desperate hope that somewhere in that crimson stream the poison might be expelled. More often it carried away the last reserves of strength, leaving behind only pallor and the final silence. When the swellings appeared, those terrible tokens beneath jaw and arm, in groin and neck, the afflicted grasped at remedies that blurred the boundary between medicine and sympathetic magic. Across Europe's plague-torn cities and countryside, a peculiar treatment emerged from the depths of folk wisdom, the application of living creatures directly upon the buboes, as if life might draw out the corruption festering within. The toad, that ancient symbol of Earth's darker humours, became an instrument of desperate healing. Practitioners of vernacular medicine pressed living toads, species of bufo, warty and cold to the touch, against the inflamed swellings, believing the creature would absorb the plague's venom through its permeable skin. The rationale derived from the doctrine of correspondences. Toads, dwelling in damp places and associated with pustular conditions since antiquity, might possess an affinity for drawing out similar maladies from human flesh. Household receipt books, passed through generations and preserved in family archives, contain matter-of-fact instructions for applying the living toad until it expires, then replacing with another. The pigeon, that ubiquitous bird of Dovecote and City Square, served an equally macabre purpose. Fresh slaughtered pigeons, their bodies still warm or deliberately heated, were split open and pressed feather side out against the plague tokens. Some plague tracts recommended living pigeons bound directly to the swellings until they, too, succumbed. The theory of opposites, heating a cold humour, cooling a hot one, justified various applications. The anatomist and chronicler Heinrich von Herford noted without judgment, they laid upon the sick the bodies of birds, that the poison might pass from man to beast. These practices transcended social boundaries. Aristocratic households employed them alongside herbal poultices prescribed by university-trained physicians, while peasant families relied upon them when no formal care could be obtained. Apothecary records from 14th century Italy reveal purchases of both medicinal herbs and pigeons for application, listed with the same clinical detachment as powdered pearl or theriac. The suffering knew no hierarchy. Desperation unified noble and commoner beneath the same terrible innovation. Yet shadows of suspicion clung to such treatments. During periods of heightened fear and scapegoating, whispers of witchcraft accompanied the use of animal applications. Those who practiced such remedies too openly, particularly women and unlicensed healers, risked accusation during the moral panics that punctuated plague years. Trial records preserve testimony of individuals charged with maleficium for preparing toad poultices, their healing arts reinterpreted as diabolical congress. The natural historians of the Renaissance, compiling their vast herbals and medical compendia, catalogued these remedies with scholarly distance. They recorded them as curiosities of popular practice, neither fully endorsing nor condemning, preserving for posterity the desperate ingenuity of plague-time medicine. In plague ballads and vernacular chronicles, tales circulated of miraculous recoveries attributed to the toad's sacrifice or the pigeon's intercession. Though whether these represented actual survival or the embroidered memory of collective trauma remains forever obscured by time's merciful veil. In the marriage of ancient preservative and mercurial quicksilver, physicians believed they had discovered a potent weapon against corruption itself. Mercury, that strange liquid metal known to alchemists as quicksilver, extracted from cinnabar's red ore, possessed properties that seemed to transcend the ordinary pharmacopoeia. It could dissolve gold, induce violent purging, and shimmer with an otherworldly luminescence that suggested divine or infernal origins. When plague physicians sought substances powerful enough to combat the pestilence's putrefaction, they turned inevitably to this most ambiguous of elements. The iatrochemical practitioners, followers of the revolutionary Paracelsus, promoted mineral remedies with evangelical fervor. They abandoned the gentler compounds of Galenic tradition for aggressive chemical interventions. Mercury, prepared as calomel or mixed with vinegar, that sharp preservative known since Roman times as posca, was administered both internally and externally. Plague manuals from the 16th century contain recipes calling for quicksilver dissolved in strong vinegar and oxymel to be taken in small draughts for the cleansing of internal corruption. The apothecaries who compounded these preparations worked in shuttered rooms, their hands trembling not from fear of plague, but from the chronic tremors that afflicted their profession. The historical pharmacopoeias reveal the confidence with which these toxic mixtures were prescribed. In his writings, Paracelsus declared, "What is poison? All things are poison, and nothing is without poison. Only the dose makes a thing not poison." This philosophy justified the administration of substances that would later be recognized as profoundly harmful. Patients swallowed mercury-laden concoctions believing they consumed concentrated purity, that the metal's ability to slip through cracks and dissolve other substances would allow it to penetrate the body's deepest recesses and expel the plague's corruption. The consequences manifested with terrible reliability. Mercurialism, chronic mercury poisoning, produced a constellation of agonies, bleeding gums that blackened and receded, teeth that loosened and fell like autumn leaves, tremors that began in the hands and spread throughout the body. The condition, known as tyelism, caused uncontrollable salivation, leaving victims unable to speak or swallow, their mouths perpetually drooling mercury-tainted fluid. Neurological deterioration followed, transforming the once hopeful patient into a trembling, confused shadow. Scandals erupted when prominent individuals perished not from plague, but from their supposed cure. Lawsuits between families and physicians filled court dockets, though proving causation remained nearly impossible within contemporary medical understanding. The mercury trade itself became a source of fraud and danger. Apothecaries adulterated their supplies, mixing cheaper substances with genuine quicksilver. Merchants along Spanish and Portuguese maritime routes controlled cinnabar imports from mines in Almaden and Idrija, their monopolies generating fortunes built upon therapeutic poison. The debates between medical factions intensified. Conservative Galenists condemned the chemical physicians as reckless innovators who betrayed millennia of accumulated wisdom. The iatrochemists responded that tradition had failed, that plague demanded revolutionary interventions. Between these warring certainties, patients suffered and perished, some from disease, others from cure, all from the fundamental ignorance that shrouded the true nature of contagion. In the courts and castles where wealth accumulated like sediment, where tapestries depicted celestial spheres and alchemical laboratories adjoined private chapels, the privileged sought remedies befitting their station. Precious stones, those concentrated essences of Earth's treasury, were ground to powder and consumed as medicine, their monetary value inseparable from their supposed therapeutic potency. The tradition stretched back through medieval lapidaries to ancient texts linking gemstones with planetary influences and humoral properties, a medicine of luxury and symbolism that flourished even as common folk pressed toads to their swellings. The great compilations, works attributed to Albertus Magnus and later Renaissance authorities, catalogued which stones corresponded to which maladies. Emerald powder, associated with Venus and the cooling of fevers, was prescribed for plague's burning heat. Rubies, solar stones of vitality, were pulverized and mixed into electuaries to fortify the heart against corruption. Powdered pearls, harvested from distant seas, entered aristocratic pharmacopoeias, both for their supposed cooling properties and their conspicuous expense. A chronicler at the Burgundian court recorded, "The Duke consumed daily a preparation of dissolved pearls and coral, believing these oceanic treasures held power against the terrestrial poison. The bezoar stone occupied supreme status among these mineral antidotes, a concretion formed in the digestive systems of certain animals, particularly Persian goats, believed to possess universal neutralizing properties. Imported along trade routes from the Orient, genuine bezoars commanded astronomical prices. Royal apothecaries maintained collections of these stones, scraping minute quantities into wine or water for plague prevention. The theory held that as the bezoar neutralized poison in animal bodies, so too it would protect human flesh from pestilential corruption. Court physicians administered these preparations with ceremonial gravitas, the rarity of the remedy reinforcing its perceived efficacy. Yet this medicine of the privileged spawned its own marketplace of deception. Jewelers and fraudulent apothecaries ground common glass and passed it as pulverized gemstone. Scandals erupted when wealthy patients, having consumed fortunes in supposed gem powder, perished as surely as the poor who could afford no remedy at all. Investigation of apothecary shops revealed jars labeled powdered emerald containing nothing but tinted crystal, bezoar, that was merely polished stone. The intersection of medicine, alchemy, and luxury consumption created opportunities for spectacular fraud. The Paracelsian reformers scorned such remedies as empty symbolism, arguing that true chemical medicine required active principles, not inert minerals valued primarily for their rarity. Yet, aristocratic demand persisted, driven by the desire for remedies that reflected social status. To consume powdered ruby was to assert one's place in the cosmic hierarchy, to combat plague with the same materials that adorned crowns and reliquaries. In the archaeology of early modern pharmacies, residues of genuine powdered gems occasionally surface, testimony to treatments that were simultaneously medical intervention and conspicuous consumption. The wealthy perished alongside the poor, their jeweled medicines offering no protection, only the cold comfort of dying expensively. Among the most ancient and persistent practices in the physician's repertoire was the examination and therapeutic use of urine, that golden effluent which, since Hippocratic times, had served both as diagnostic window and medicinal agent. The practice of uroscopy elevated urine to a text to be read, its color, clarity, sediment, and odor, revealing the body's internal state. Elaborate urine wheels painted on vellum and displayed in physician chambers charted 20 variations from clear as spring water to black as sin, each shade corresponding to particular humoral imbalances and disease states. But uroscopy's diagnostic function represented only half the story. Urine itself became medicine, drunk or bathed in, appearing in household receipts and monastic infirmary records with the same matter-of-fact notation given to herbal preparations. The rationale derived from multiple theoretical frameworks. Urine contained concentrated bodily essence, it possessed cleansing salts and ammonia, and as a product of the body's own purification systems, might combat corruption when reintroduced. Medieval manuscripts preserved recipes calling for the patient's own morning urine, preserved in glass, to be drunk at evening for the prevention of putrefaction. During plague outbreaks, when conventional remedies failed and desperation mounted, urine therapy intensified. Some plague tracts recommended bathing in warm urine to cleanse the skin and prevent infection. Others prescribed drinking aged urine, particularly from healthy individuals, believing it might transfer some constitutional resistance. The practice appeared across social strata. Chroniclers noted both peasant households and urban merchant families employing such methods. A Florentine diarist recorded without evident revulsion, "My neighbor, being afflicted, bathed in the urine of his children, hoping their youth might preserve him." The monastery infirmaries, those repositories of medical knowledge where monks compiled herbals and tested remedies upon their suffering brethren, included urine in poultices and wound dressings. The ammonia's caustic properties did possess some genuine antiseptic effect, though this was understood through humoral rather than chemical principles. Distillation of urine to extract sal ammoniac, ammonium chloride, represented a more sophisticated approach, practiced by iatrochemical experimenters who sought to isolate urine's active principles from its grosser matter. Yet the practice inspired revulsion and moral critique even among contemporaries. Moralists condemned urine therapy as indecent, an inversion of natural order that degraded human dignity. Physicians debated its utility in learned disputations, some defending it on classical authority, others rejecting it as vulgar and ineffective. The prominent humanist Erasmus, observing medical practices of his time, wrote satirically of physicians who prescribed that patients drink down what should be cast away, in the vain hope that poison might cure poison. The epidemiological reality remained hidden from practitioners. Drinking urine could transmit pathogens, worsen dehydration, and provided no protection against plague. The desperate measure documented in diaries and plague chronicles represented not medical insight, but the terrifying extremes to which the afflicted would reach when conventional treatments proved futile. In the museum collections that preserve medieval medical equipment, the delicate glass urinals used for uroscopy stand as testament to a diagnostic art, while the darker history of urine as cure survives primarily in written testimony, accounts preserved less for their medical value than as records of human desperation under pestilential siege. In the labyrinth of medieval urban infrastructure, where streets sloped toward central gutters and waste accumulated in fetid pools, a peculiar theory took hold: that familiarity with corruption might breed resistance to it. The dominant medical paradigm of miasma, the belief that plague spread through corrupted air, through miasmata rising from decay and putrefaction, suggested to some minds that habitual exposure to foul airs might harden the constitution against their lethal effects. If the pestilence travelled on noxious vapours, might not those already accustomed to breathing such vapours prove more resilient? Observations seem to support this notion. The tanners who worked with decaying hides, the butchers whose shops ran with blood and offal, the gong farmers and nightmen who descended into cesspits to remove human waste, these labourers of filth appeared, in some plague years, to survive at higher rates than their neighbours. Chroniclers noted this paradox with puzzlement. A Venetian health board record from 1348 observed, "The scavengers and those dwelling near the privies, whom we expected to perish first, have shown unexpected endurance, while citizens of cleaner quarters fall in great numbers." This observation bred a desperate logic. If accidental exposure to sewage conferred some protection, might deliberate exposure serve as prophylaxis? Plague tracts from Italy and France occasionally reference this practice, describing individuals who chose to remain in cellars near cesspits or to dwell in chambers above privies, believing the thickened air they breathed would fortify them against pestilence. The theory connected to broader Galenic concepts of habituation, the principle that the body adapts to its environment through gradual exposure, tempering humours to match external conditions. The urban poor, lacking choice in their lodgings, dwelt by necessity near waste channels and communal latrines. When some among them survived plague waves that devastated wealthier quarters, rumours of immunity flourished, yet public health authorities, operating under the same miasma theory that inspired such practices, drew opposite conclusions. Venetian and Florentine plague regulations mandated the clearing of sewers and slums, convinced that concentrations of foul air bred disease. The contradiction revealed the deep uncertainty underlying plague time policy. Was miasma cause or cure, poison or prophylactic? The chronicler Giovanni Boccaccio, writing during Florence's plague visitation, described the confusion of competing theories. Some held that living moderately and avoiding excess would preserve them, while others maintained that drinking heavily and dwelling among stench would make them impervious. The 17th century physician Bernardino Ramazzini, pioneering the study of occupational medicine, investigated why certain trades seemed to confer resistance. His work, De Morbis Artificum Diatriba, documented the health conditions of sewer workers and those exposed to corrupt airs, noting their surprising survival rates while stopping short of recommending deliberate exposure. London's Great Plague of 1665 reignited these debates. Satirists mocked those who sought protection through dwelling near sewers, while desperate citizens, witnessing the failures of conventional preventions, experimented with environmental exposures. The practice represented a tragic misapplication of genuine observation, the relative survival of certain occupational groups, transformed through miasma theory into active strategy. It would require centuries and the eventual triumph of germ theory before the actual reasons for differential survival, vector exposure patterns, living density, and chance displaced the dangerous notion that corruption itself might serve as armor against pestilence. In the autumn of 1348, as the pestilence consumed cities from Genoa to Bruges, a new terror joined the plague. Columns of men moving like spectral armies through the countryside, their backs laid open by knotted whips, their voices rising in liturgical chant. The flagellant movement, erupting with sudden violence across Central Europe, transformed penance into public spectacle and religious fervour into social upheaval. These were not merely individuals seeking personal salvation, but organized bands, sometimes numbering in the thousands, who believed that humanity's collective sin had summoned divine punishment, and that only collective suffering might turn aside God's wrath. The movement drew upon deep currents of medieval spirituality. Penitential processions had appeared sporadically since the 11th century, notably in Perugia during 1260, when apocalyptic fervor gripped Italy. But the Black Death gave flagellation unprecedented urgency and scale. The chronicler Heinrich of Herford described their appearance in Germany. They came bearing crosses and banners stripped to the waist regardless of weather, beating themselves with scourges tipped with iron points until blood flowed freely. Each procession followed a rigid ritual, 33 days of penance, symbolizing Christ's earthly years, moving from town to town in solemn formation. Jean de Venette, writing from Paris, captured both the movement's appeal and its disturbing excess. They proclaimed that their blood mingled with Christ's blood, that their suffering purchased mercy for all Christendom. The flagellants developed their own liturgies, sang hymns of their own composition, and claimed authority independent of clerical hierarchy. This autonomy alarmed church officials. At Avignon, Pope Clement VI watched the movement spread with growing concern, recognizing in it both heretical tendencies and potential for social chaos. The papal response came swiftly and decisively. The bull Inter Sollicitudines, issued in 1349, condemned flagellant processions as unauthorized and dangerous. Clement denounced their claims of special grace, their rejection of clerical authority, and their propagation of apocalyptic prophecies. The document declared, "These practices, undertaken without proper ecclesiastical sanction, breed heresy and discord rather than divine favor." But papal prohibition could not immediately halt a movement fueled by terror and conviction. The flagellants' impact extended beyond theology into social catastrophe. Their apocalyptic preaching identified scapegoats for divine anger. In German cities, Mainz, Strasbourg, Frankfurt, flagellant processions preceded or accompanied massacres of Jewish communities. The chronicler Giovanni Villani recorded how they stirred up the people against the Jews, claiming that only by purging sin could the plague be ended. Thousands perished in these pogroms, entire communities obliterated while flagellants led the violence or stood by singing hymns of purification. The movements also accelerated plague transmission. Mass gatherings, processions moving between cities, the intimate contact of communal bloodletting, all provided vectors for disease spread. Yet participants interpreted subsequent plague outbreaks as proof that penance remained insufficient, that more suffering was required. The logic became circular and self-fulfilling. Plague justified flagellation, and flagellation's failure to halt plague demanded more extreme measures. Secular authorities, initially tolerant or even supportive, grew alarmed. Imperial edicts joined papal bulls in suppressing the movement. By 1350, organized flagellant processions had been driven underground or dispersed, their leaders arrested or forced into hiding. Yet the practice persisted in modified forms. Monastic communities continued private flagellation as part of devotional discipline. Mystics like Catherine of Siena and Vincent Ferrer maintained penitential scourging within orthodox bounds. Spanish confraternities developed formalized flagellant processions during Holy Week, stripped of their apocalyptic fervor, but preserving the ritual of redemptive suffering. These remedies, born from humoral theory, miasma doctrine, and theological conviction, reveal a civilization grappling with catastrophe beyond comprehension. Physicians wielded lancets with scholarly confidence, while desperate households pressed living creatures to fevered flesh. The wealthy consumed fortunes in powdered gems as the poor bathed in their own effluent. Penitents scourged themselves through city streets, believing divine wrath demanded blood for blood. That these interventions often hastened demise rather than forestalled it exposes the tragic chasm between human ingenuity and microbial reality. Yet within this darkness burns an undimmed testament. Faced with annihilation, humanity refused passivity, choosing flawed action over paralyzed despair.